The night they called me a nobody was the same night my blood became the only thing that could save the little girl they couldn't afford to lose. I still remember the smell of lemon disinfectant clinging to my uniform long after my shift should have ended. It settled into my skin the way exhaustion settled into my bones after cleaning 12 floors of St. Matthew's Medical Center, one polished hallway at a time. My name is Naomi Carter, 27 years old, and for the past 4 years I had been the woman most people never noticed. I emptied trash cans before surgeons arrived. I mopped waiting rooms after frightened families went home. I wiped fingerprints from glass doors that wealthy visitors pushed open without ever looking at the person holding the mop. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid my rent on a tiny apartment 15 miles from downtown Chicago, kept groceries in my refrigerator, and reminded me every day that honest work carried its own kind of dignity. My shift was supposed to end at 10 p.m. Instead, I found myself scrubbing a hallway outside the pediatric intensive care unit while rain tapped softly against the hospital windows. The floor gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, reflecting every passing pair of hurried shoes. Nurses rushed by with clipboards. Doctors spoke in quiet voices that somehow sounded urgent even when they whispered. Somewhere nearby, a little girl laughed for just a second before the sound disappeared behind a closing door. I smiled without realizing it. Children always found a way to make hospitals feel less lonely. My cleaning cart rattled as I pushed it toward the elevator, already thinking about leftover chicken soup waiting at home and whether my old sedan would start in the cold rain. Then everything changed. An alarm echoed through the hallway, sharp enough to stop every conversation. The peaceful rhythm of the floor vanished in an instant. Nurses sprinted toward the emergency entrance. A physician called for additional staff. Someone wheeled an empty stretcher past me, so quickly the breeze lifted a strand of my hair. I stepped aside, pressing myself against the wall, trying not to be in anyone's way. That's what people like me learn to do. Stay invisible. Stay helpful. Stay quiet. A young nurse nearly collided with my cleaning cart before stopping to catch her breath. Her face had lost all its color. "They're looking for O-negative blood," she said to another nurse as they hurried past. "The girl's losing time, and the family has already been tested." I froze. O-negative. I knew my blood type because donating twice a year had become a habit after my mother passed away. She used to tell me that kindness was the only thing people could carry into every room without adding weight to their shoulders. I looked down at the yellow gloves covering my hands. Nobody had asked me anything. Nobody even knew my name. I was only the maid pushing a mop down the hallway. Yet something deep inside refused to let me keep walking toward the elevator. Before I could talk myself out of it, I removed my gloves, straightened my faded navy uniform, and quietly followed the nurses toward the emergency department, never imagining that one simple sentence, "I'm O-negative. If you still need someone, I'll help," was about to uncover a truth that had been hidden for 7 years. I expected someone to tell me I was standing in the wrong place. That was how moments like this usually ended for people wearing uniforms like mine. Instead, the nurse looked straight into my eyes, nodded once, and said, "Come with me." Those 3 words echoed in my mind as she hurried me through a maze of bright hallways I had cleaned hundreds of times, but had never walked as a patient or donor. My heartbeat grew louder with every step. I kept telling myself that this was only blood. Blood did not care about job titles, expensive shoes, or the neighborhood where you lived. Blood simply kept people alive. The donation room felt surprisingly quiet compared to the chaos outside. A technician confirmed my identification, checked my blood type, and asked the routine questions with practiced calm. I answered each one while staring at the ceiling tiles above me. They looked exactly like the ones I dusted every Tuesday morning. Funny how familiar things could suddenly feel completely different. Within minutes, everything was ready. The collection bag slowly filled beside me, a deep red reminder that every person inside this building carried the same color beneath their skin. I wondered about the little girl. I wondered if she liked cartoons before school or pancakes on Saturday mornings. I wondered whether she knew how many strangers were hoping she would wake up. Those thoughts stayed with me until the technician smiled gently. "You did a good thing tonight, Miss Carter." I thanked her, accepted a small bottle of orange juice, and slipped quietly back into the hallway before anyone could make a fuss. My shift was technically over, but there were still supply carts to return and equipment to organize. Life had a way of moving forward whether anyone noticed your kindness or not. Nearly 40 minutes later, I was rolling my cleaning cart toward the service elevator when the entire atmosphere on the pediatric floor changed again. Security officers appeared near every entrance. Men in tailored suits stepped off a private elevator, speaking softly into earpieces. They did not look frightened. They looked focused, like people accustomed to solving problems simply by arriving. In the center of them walked a tall man, wearing a charcoal overcoat still damp from the rain. His silver watch caught the overhead lights as he removed a pair of black leather gloves. He moved quickly without rushing, every person instinctively making room for him. I did not know his name then, but I could see the worry written across his face despite the confidence in every step. One of the doctors met him halfway down the corridor. They exchanged only a few quiet sentences before relief softened the doctor's expression. The little girl had survived the emergency. The man closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling a breath that sounded as though he had been holding it for hours. Then he asked a question that made everyone nearby fall silent. Who donated the blood? The physician hesitated before answering. One of our staff members stepped forward. The man nodded immediately. Bring me to them. I would like to thank them personally. My stomach tightened. Surely there had been several donors. Tonight. Surely he was looking for someone else. I lowered my eyes and pushed my cart toward the elevator, hoping to disappear before anyone connected my name to the answer. Behind me, I heard another voice call out from the laboratory doors. Doctor, wait. There is something unusual in the compatibility report. I think you need to see this immediately. The word stopped everyone in the hallway. Even from 20 feet away, I saw the physician turn back toward the laboratory with an expression that shifted from relief to confusion. The man in the charcoal overcoat followed without hesitation, his polished shoes echoing across the spotless floor, while the security team quietly stepped aside. I should have left. My time card had already recorded the end of my shift, and nobody expected the cleaning staff to linger around private medical discussions. Still, something about the doctor's face made my feet refuse to move. I busied myself wiping down the handle of my cart, pretending not to notice anything, while every instinct urged me to listen. Through the partially open laboratory door, I caught only fragments of the conversation. Run it again. We already did. That cannot be correct. Another voice answered with careful confidence. The blood type matches perfectly, but that is not what concerns me. The compatibility markers are unusually close. I have never seen this level outside immediate biological family members. Silence settled over the room. Even from the hallway, it felt heavy. The man finally spoke. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the strain underneath. Are you saying someone in my family donated? The laboratory director slowly shook his head. According to the registration records, the donor is Naomi Carter. She is employed here. I felt my stomach tighten the moment I heard my name. It sounded strange floating through a room where people wore tailored suits and white coats. The wealthy man frowned slightly. Naomi Carter? He repeated the name as though searching his memory. I do not know anyone by that name. Neither do we, the physician admitted. She works for the Environmental Services Department. For a brief second, nobody spoke. I had grown used to the silence that often followed those words. Environmental Services. Housekeeping. Maid. Different names for people who quietly made hospitals function without ever appearing in photographs or annual reports. Then something unexpected happened. The man looked directly at the physician and said, "Her position does not matter. She saved my daughter. I would still like to thank her." Before anyone could answer, another technician hurried into the room carrying a fresh folder. She looked nervous. "Doctor, there is another issue." The laboratory director accepted the papers, scanned them once, then a second time, his eyebrows drawing closer together with every line. "No," he whispered. "That is impossible." The physician reached for the report. "What is it?" The director lowered his voice, but the hallway had become so quiet that every word carried farther than he intended. These inherited markers should not appear together unless... He stopped himself, staring back down at the page. The wealthy man stepped closer. "Unless what?" The laboratory director hesitated before answering. "Unless there is a biological relationship that nobody is aware of." My fingers tightened around the cleaning cart until my knuckles turned pale. None of this made sense. I had never seen that little girl before tonight. I had never met her father. I had never even heard their names. The physician folded the report slowly, looking from the laboratory director to the man beside him. "We are not making any conclusions," he said carefully. "This could be a documentation error or an equipment issue. We need additional testing before speaking to anyone." The wealthy man nodded once, but his eyes had changed. The relief that had filled them minutes earlier had been replaced by quiet determination. "Then verify everything," he said. "I do not care how long it takes. I want every record reviewed from the beginning." As the laboratory door closed, I finally reached for my card, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But before I could take a single step, I heard someone behind me call my name with unmistakable certainty. "Miss Carter, would you please wait just a moment?" I turned around slowly, convinced there had been some mistake. People like me were usually asked to move a cleaning cart, not invited into conversations with department directors. The physician standing a few feet away offered a polite smile that looked carefully measured. "Miss Carter, thank you for staying." I glanced down at my worn work shoes before answering. "I was actually just leaving. This will only take a few minutes." My hands instinctively smoothed the wrinkles from my Navy housekeeping uniform. I suddenly became aware of every faded stitch, every scuff on my shoes, every reminder that I belonged on the other side of these polished hospital doors. The tall man standing beside the physician stepped forward. Up close, he looked older than I had first thought, perhaps around 40, with silver beginning to appear at his temples. His eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had almost lost everything that mattered. "My name is William Ashford," he said quietly, extending his hand. "I have been told that you donated blood for my daughter tonight." I hesitated only for a moment before shaking his hand. His grip was firm but respectful, without the hesitation I had grown accustomed to from people who often looked surprised to touch someone wearing my uniform. "I am glad she is going to be all right," I answered. "That is all that matters." He studied my face for a second, as though trying to understand why someone would help a complete stranger without expecting anything in return. "You saved Emily's life." I shook my head gently. "The doctors saved her. I just happened to have the blood they needed." A faint smile crossed his face for the first time that evening. That kind of humility is rare. Before I could respond, the laboratory director stepped into the hallway holding the same folder I had seen moments earlier. His expression remained thoughtful. "Miss Carter, would you mind answering a few questions?" "Of course. Have you ever been treated at this hospital before?" The question caught me off guard. "Not that I remember. I have worked here for 4 years, but I have never been admitted." He nodded and made another note. "Were you born in Chicago?" "No. Milwaukee. At least that is what my birth certificate says." "Do you know whether you were adopted?" I blinked in surprise. "No. Why would you ask that?" The physician immediately stepped in before the laboratory director could continue. "Please understand, we are simply reviewing medical records because of an unusual laboratory result. We do not want you to worry." Worry. It was an impossible request after a question like that. My heart began beating faster, not from fear, but from confusion. I had never questioned my past. My mother had raised me alone until she passed away when I was 19. She rarely spoke about the day I was born, saying only that life had been difficult and that what mattered was the family who loved you, not the paperwork stored in some filing cabinet. The laboratory director exchanged a careful glance with the physician before speaking again. "There appears to be an inconsistency involving the compatibility testing. It may be nothing more than an administrative error." William looked directly at him. "Then verify every record." The director nodded. "We already contacted medical archives. Unfortunately, there is a complication." "What complication?" William asked. "Several maternity files from 7 years ago were transferred into digital storage during a software conversion." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "Some of those records are incomplete." The hallway fell silent again. I watched the physician slowly remove his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as though trying to solve a puzzle that refused to fit together. Then a hospital administrator hurried toward us, carrying an old cardboard archive box against his chest. "Doctor," he called, breathing hard. "We found something in off-site storage." He placed the weathered box on a nearby counter, brushed away a layer of dust, and lifted the lid. Inside rested a stack of paper files tied together with a faded blue ribbon that had not been touched in years. The faded blue ribbon looked as fragile as dried leaves. One careful pull, and the stack of forgotten files spread across the counter like pieces of a story that had waited years to be told. Nobody spoke. Even the nurses passing through the hallway lowered their voices as though they sensed something extraordinary was unfolding. I remained where I stood, still holding the handle of my cleaning cart, wondering why a woman who spent her nights polishing hospital floors had suddenly become part of a conversation that belonged to executives and physicians. The hospital administrator adjusted his glasses before opening the first folder. These records came from the old maternity wing before the expansion, he explained. Most were scanned years ago, but a small number stayed in storage because they were marked for manual review. The laboratory director carefully flipped through the yellowed pages. Some forms were complete. Others had handwritten corrections in fading blue ink. Several pages carried bright orange stickers labeled verification pending. William stood beside him without saying a word, his attention fixed on every page that turned. Finally, one document made the director stop. His expression changed instantly. "This is odd." The physician stepped closer. "What did you find?" The director pointed toward a line near the bottom of the page. "There are 2 separate patient identification numbers attached to the same newborn admission record." The administrator frowned. "That should not happen." "It should not," the director agreed. "Unless someone manually corrected the file after discharge." My heartbeat grew louder again. I still did not understand why any of this involved me. Then the physician quietly asked, "Can you identify the names?" The director traced the faded handwriting with one finger before answering. "One record belongs to an infant who later became Emily Ashford." William immediately looked up. "And the second?" The director hesitated. He looked at me for a brief moment before returning his eyes to the page. "The second name appears incomplete. The last page is missing." Silence settled over us again. It felt impossible that one missing sheet of paper could hold so much weight. Another administrator hurried into the hallway carrying a portable scanner. "Doctor, we searched the archive database using both identification numbers." He placed several printed pages beside the old folder. "There is no digital copy of the missing page, but there is an audit log." "What does it show?" the physician asked. "Someone accessed the file exactly 7 years ago." William folded his arms. "Who?" The administrator swallowed. "The employee retired 6 months later." "Can we contact that person?" William asked. "We already tried," the administrator answered quietly. "She moved out of state several years ago." I listened to every word, feeling as though I had wandered into someone else's life. None of it connected to me. None of it should have. Yet every few minutes someone glanced in my direction before looking back at the paperwork. The laboratory director finally lifted the newest compatibility report and placed it beside the old maternity file. He compared both documents for nearly a full minute before speaking again. "The inherited markers are consistent." The physician looked puzzled. "Consistent with what?" The laboratory director drew a slow breath. "Consistent with a maternal biological relationship." My mind struggled to understand the sentence. Maternal, biological, relationship. They sounded like separate words instead of one impossible conclusion. I shook my head before anyone could misunderstand my silence. "There has to be some mistake," I said softly. "I have never had children." Nobody argued with me. Nobody nodded either. William looked from the report to my face, searching for something neither of us could explain. Then the pediatric nurse appeared at the end of the hallway with tears shining in her eyes. She smiled warmly before saying the words that stopped every conversation once again. "Emily is awake." And the very first person she asked to see was Naomi Carter. My legs felt strangely heavy as I followed the pediatric nurse toward Emily's room. Every step echoed with questions I could not answer. Why would a little girl I had never met ask for me? Perhaps she simply wanted to thank the person who had donated blood. That explanation made sense. It had to make sense. Anything else would have been impossible. The hallway outside the intensive care room was quieter now. The frantic rush from earlier had faded into gentle conversations and the steady rhythm of medical monitors. William walked beside me without saying a word. For the first time since meeting him, he no longer looked like a man who could solve every problem with confidence. He looked like a father searching for certainty in a world that suddenly offered none. The nurse paused outside the room before smiling softly. "She is still tired, so please keep the visit short." William nodded. I stood back, expecting him to enter first, but he turned toward me instead. "Would you come in with me?" I blinked in surprise. "I do not think that is appropriate." "Please," he said quietly. "She asked for you." I followed him inside. The room was warm, filled with the faint scent of clean linen and fresh flowers someone had delivered earlier that evening. Emily rested against white pillows, looking much smaller than I had imagined. A stuffed rabbit lay tucked beneath one arm, while a blanket covered her shoulders. Her cheeks had regained a little color, though she still looked tired. The moment her eyes opened, they moved past her father and settled on me. A slow smile appeared across her face. "You came," she whispered. I smiled back without thinking. "Of course." I walked closer to the bed, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment nearby. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Her voice remained soft but steady. "The nurse said you helped me." I shook my head gently. "A lot of people helped you tonight." She studied me with surprising focus for a child her age. Then she reached out one small hand. Instinctively, I took it. The room became completely silent. Emily relaxed almost immediately, her shoulders lowering as though something familiar had finally returned. I could not explain why the simple touch felt so natural. It was as if I had held that little hand before, even though I knew I never had. William noticed it too. I saw the confusion in his eyes, followed by something even deeper that he tried very hard to hide. A pediatric physician quietly entered the room, stopping beside the doorway. He watched the scene for several seconds before motioning for William to step outside. William hesitated, looking first at Emily and then at me. "I will only be a minute," he told his daughter. Emily nodded without taking her eyes off me. As soon as the door closed behind them, she looked up and asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "Have we met before?" I smiled gently. "I do not think so." She frowned slightly, as though trying to remember a dream that disappeared each time she reached for it. "You feel familiar." My heart skipped a beat. Before I could answer, the door opened again. William returned, but his expression had changed. He looked pale, almost stunned. Behind him stood the laboratory director holding a sealed envelope. The physician closed the door carefully before speaking in a calm voice. "Mr. Ashford, the additional genetic analysis has been completed ahead of schedule." William slowly accepted the envelope, but made no attempt to open it. "You already know what it says," he whispered. The laboratory director gave a solemn nod. "Yes." The room became so quiet that I could hear the rain tapping softly against the window. Then the physician looked directly at me and spoke words that would change every memory I had ever trusted. "Miss Carter," before anyone says another word, "there is someone on her way here who believes she knows exactly how this happened." The next 30 minutes felt longer than the 7 years everyone kept mentioning. Nobody left the room. Nobody seemed willing to breathe too deeply, as though one careless movement might shatter whatever fragile truth was finally beginning to surface. Emily drifted back to sleep with her small hand still resting in mine until the nurse gently adjusted her blanket and encouraged me to step into the family consultation room across the hall. I quietly slipped my hand away, watching her peaceful expression for one last moment before following the physician outside. Waiting inside the conference room was an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and a leather folder resting on her lap. She stood the moment we entered. Her eyes moved slowly across the room before stopping on me. They filled with emotion almost immediately. "You look exactly like your mother," she whispered. I stared at her, completely confused. "Do I know you?" She shook her head. "No, but I knew your mother." The physician introduced her as Margaret Ellis, a retired maternity supervisor who had worked at St. Matthew's Medical Center until several years earlier. She clutched the folder so tightly that her hands trembled. When the hospital contacted me tonight, I knew why. William remained standing near the window, silent but attentive. The laboratory director carefully placed the sealed genetic report on the table without opening it. Margaret slowly lowered herself into a chair before speaking again. "There was one night I have never been able to forget." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had replayed the same memory thousands of times. The maternity unit was overwhelmed. 2 emergency deliveries arrived almost at the same time. Different families, different backgrounds, different lives. Every nurse was moving as fast as possible. She closed her eyes briefly. During a temporary evacuation of one section, identification bracelets had to be replaced after becoming damaged. We believed everything had been corrected before the babies were discharged. She opened the folder and carefully removed a faded incident report that had never received a final signature. Months later, I noticed an inconsistency between 2 archived records. I reported it, but another administrator assured me the database had already been corrected. The physician accepted the document with visible concern. There was never a formal investigation. Margaret nodded sadly. I was retiring. I trusted the people above me. She looked directly at me. I have regretted that decision every single day. William finally broke his silence. Are you saying there may have been an error involving Emily? Margaret answered slowly. I am saying I feared there had been one for years, but I never had enough evidence to prove it. The laboratory director carefully slid the sealed envelope toward William. You do now? William looked at the envelope for several long seconds before pushing it back across the table. No. Everyone looked at him in surprise. He drew a slow breath. If this changes all of our lives, then none of us should hear it alone. The physician nodded and opened the envelope himself. His eyes scanned the report once before reading it again more carefully. The room became completely still. I could hear nothing except the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Finally, he lowered the pages and looked directly at me. His voice remained gentle, but every word landed with impossible weight. The genetic analysis confirms an extremely high probability of a direct maternal relationship between you and Emily. I felt the room begin to spin. I shook my head almost instinctively. That cannot be true. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. William closed his own for a brief moment before looking toward the hallway where Emily rested peacefully, unaware that the life she had always known had just begun to change forever. Then the physician quietly added one final sentence. The court will determine the legal records later, but medically there is no longer any reasonable doubt about what the results are telling us. I did not remember leaving the consultation room. One moment I was staring at the genetic report lying on the table, and the next I found myself standing beside the large window overlooking the rain-soaked parking lot. My reflection looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. The same Navy housekeeping uniform, the same tired eyes, the same woman who had arrived expecting nothing more than the end of another shift. Yet nothing about my life felt familiar anymore. Behind me, I heard the conference room door open. William walked over quietly and stopped several feet away, giving me space instead of sympathy. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. After a long silence, he finally spoke. I do not know what tomorrow will look like. Neither did I. I folded my arms tightly, trying to steady my breathing. Emily has always known you as her father. He nodded immediately, and she always will. His answer came without hesitation. Nothing changes the years we have shared together. I turned to look at him. There was no anger in his face, no accusation, only exhaustion mixed with compassion. I am not here to take anyone away from you, I whispered. I never even knew. My voice faded before I could finish. I know, he answered softly. None of this is your fault. Those words broke something inside me that I had been holding together since the laboratory first spoke my name. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I quickly looked away, embarrassed, but William pretended not to notice. Sometimes kindness was simply allowing another person to keep their dignity. The following morning, the hospital administration called an emergency meeting. Independent investigators were assigned to review every archived maternity record connected to the missing documentation. Staff members who had managed historical records were interviewed. Procedures that had remained unchanged for years were suspended pending review. Nobody tried to hide what had happened. The hospital publicly acknowledged that serious documentation failures from the past required a complete investigation. Watching those announcements from the employee break room felt surreal. I had spent years quietly cleaning conference rooms where executives discussed policies I never imagined would one day include my own life. Several coworkers approached me throughout the day. Some offered hugs. Others simply stood beside me without speaking. Even people who had rarely looked in my direction before now greeted me with gentle smiles. I appreciated their kindness, but I also noticed something else. For the first time, they were seeing me before they saw my uniform. Late that afternoon, William invited me to join him in the hospital garden while Emily rested. The rain had finally stopped, leaving tiny drops of water sparkling across the flowers. We sat on opposite ends of a wooden bench, listening to birds instead of medical equipment. I have already spoken with my attorneys, William said. My heart tightened. I am not interested in a legal fight. He shook his head. Neither am I. He looked toward the children's wing. I asked them to focus on one thing only. Whatever is best for Emily. I nodded slowly. That is all I want to. He smiled for the first time without sadness behind it. Then perhaps we are already on the same side. Before I could answer, Emily appeared at the garden entrance holding the nurse's hand. The moment she saw us, she smiled brightly and walked toward the bench. She slipped one small hand into mine and the other into William's without choosing between us. Children had a remarkable way of seeing truth before adults complicated it. She looked up with complete innocence and asked, "Can we all have dinner together when I get out of the hospital?" William and I exchanged a quiet glance. For the first time since this impossible journey had begun, neither of us searched for the perfect answer. We simply smiled at the little girl who had unknowingly brought two strangers together long before any laboratory ever uncovered the truth. 1 year later, I still walk through the front doors of St. Matthew's Medical Center, but almost everything else about my life had changed. I no longer arrived before sunrise carrying only a mop and a bucket. After months of counseling, legal reviews, and countless conversations that sometimes lasted until midnight, I had accepted a new position as the hospital's patient family advocate, helping parents navigate the same confusing hallways that had once changed my own life forever. The hospital board completed its independent investigation, publicly acknowledging the record failures that had remained hidden for years and introducing new safeguards designed to ensure that no family would ever face the same heartbreak again. Accountability had finally replaced silence. Some mornings I still paused outside the pediatric wing before beginning work, not because I was haunted by the past, but because I wanted to remember how quickly one ordinary evening could become the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Emily had recovered completely. Her laughter once again filled every room she entered, and she somehow managed to convince nearly every nurse to keep extra coloring books at the station just for her. She continued calling William Dad, exactly as she always had, and hearing that never caused me pain. It reminded me that love was built through years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, school recitals, and countless ordinary moments that no laboratory report could measure. At the same time, she had slowly grown comfortable calling me Mom Naomi, a name she invented herself because, as she proudly explained one afternoon, I have room in my heart for both. No judge, no lawyer, and no document could have expressed the truth more beautifully than a 7-year-old child. William and I never allowed pride to become another obstacle in Emily's life. We attended school events together, celebrated birthdays around the same table, and learned that cooperation required far less energy than resentment. People often assumed our unusual family arrangement must have been difficult. Sometimes it was. Healing always required patience. But every difficult conversation became easier when we remembered the little girl standing at the center of all our decisions. One Saturday afternoon, Emily insisted that we visit the hospital garden where she had first held both of our hands at the same time. The flowers were in full bloom, and sunlight replaced the rain that had fallen on the night. Everything changed. She ran ahead, chasing butterflies across the grass before turning back toward us with the brightest smile I had ever seen. "Come on," she laughed. "You are walking too slow." William smiled beside me. She definitely did not inherit my patience. I laughed softly. Or mine. We followed her together, not because life had become perfect, but because it had become honest. Before leaving the garden, Emily reached into her backpack and handed each of us a folded piece of paper. She had drawn 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Above them she had carefully written, in large, uneven letters, "Family is the people who never stop showing up." I felt tears gather in my eyes as I looked at the drawing. William quietly folded his copy and placed it inside his jacket pocket as though it were something priceless. Perhaps it was. Looking back now, I understand that the greatest miracle that night was never the blood I donated. Blood saved a life, but truth restored one. The world had seen a black maid pushing a cleaning cart through silent hallways. Emily had simply seen the woman who reached out, her hand when she needed one. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness opens the oldest locked door, and when truth finally walks through, it reminds us that dignity is never determined by the uniform someone wears, but by the love they choose to give when nobody is watching.